You're listening to Best Practices with Kenny Berger. On this podcast, we talk with the country's top trial lawyers about their approaches to every aspect of practice, from case selection to closing argument. Hello, and welcome to Best Practices with Kenny Berger, a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering trial lawyers across the country through interviews with many of our nation's best. I have a statewide practice here in South Carolina, and thanks to our amazing guests and listeners, we now have a nationwide podcast. My hope is that by the end of this episode, you will be a better trial lawyer in person than you were when you first hit play, and that the lessons drawn from this interview will have a positive impact on your clients' lives. Lastly, and always, a big thank you to our team for making my role in this podcast as simple as getting to talk with and learn from truly great trial lawyers. And our guest today is the one, the only Dan Ambrose. Dan, thanks for coming on.
Well, Kenny, pleasure to be here. The one and only. I think that's pretty funny, but you are the one and only Kenny Berger, though. So you know what? We're all the only one and onlys.
That's it. All right. Now, speaking of one and only, the one and only legal conference I've been to in a long time, where I literally had to sit down in advance and try to track out my schedule and figure out which speakers I was going to see at which times, because truth be told, there are just so many damn good ones and so many great things going on all at once. Was at Trial Lawyers University recently out in Las Vegas. Trial Lawyers University is your baby and has become one of the preeminent, if not the preeminent, CLE and lawyer learning organization in the country. So tell us a little bit about TOU and your experience at the conference.
Well, I try to give people a lot of selection. And so at TLU Vegas, there was 9 lecture tracks with the top trial lawyers presenting, but there's also 15 workshop tracks, which were smaller group training, somewhere between 5 and 10 people typically. And my goal is that people are exactly where they want to be. So they're learning what they want to learn because they had so many choices. And so when you got everybody gathered in the same room who's focused and intent on learning and really and sharing and growing the same materials, I think it creates like a brain trust effect or a synergistic effect, like a mastermind effect in each small class or each class, whether there's the 5 or 10 people in a workshop or 100 to 200 people in a lecture. Still, everybody's right where they choose to be. So that's really, as far as educationally, the cornerstone of it all is allowing people to choose. I mean, of course, you got to have the best trial lawyers in the country, so that way everybody's suffering from FOBO all the time because they want to be in 5 places at once, which makes me smile because I go to a lot of conferences and there's nothing you want to see, and so you just hang out at the pool, and which is fun with your friends, but you're not getting any smarter. You're certainly not making any more money. I mean, unless you're lucky enough to get a referral at the pool, but that's a lot to count on. So that's kind of the philosophy behind it all.
And I'll say with this conference out in Vegas, for as many things as there were going on at the hotel in Las Vegas, all the rest, the people that I was spending time with, and from what I could tell, the vast majority of attendees were there. I mean, and we're there every day, multiple days, from give or take 8:30 in the morning, grabbing breakfast until around 5:30 when the tracks ended, and then ready for the different parties that you were throwing each night. I mean, it was a hell of a learning experience. So hats off to you and your whole team for putting on something that was one of a kind.
Well, I appreciate that, and it does take a lot of people. I mean, it takes a lot of people on my team, but it takes a lot of, oftentimes, people thank me for the conference and stuff, but and I'm grateful for their gratitude. But truth be told, nothing happens without the community. So without a committed group of people that really want to learn, I don't get to do what I get to do. And so I really focus this event on the attendees to get them what they really want, what they really need, which is to learn more so they get smarter, do better their cases, expand their professional networks, because everybody wants referrals, everybody wants to collaborate on cases. And if we send a referral, everybody wants to get paid their referrals. So we're all trying to make a living here, and it's not that easy. But also to have a great time, because this job is tough. It's draining. It can be mentally isolating. physically nasty, mentally bored. I mean, it's challenging. It's a tough job being a lawyer. And so when people get away, I try to do my best to make sure that they not only learn, but also have fun, because fun is really important in life.
It's a huge part of it, a huge part of it. So this is actually the first TOU conference I've been to, but before that, I was a subscriber on TOU on demand. And for folks who listen to this podcast regularly, y'all know that we don't come on here and just plug stuff, right? Like we're not out here trying to pitch products and make sales. But for me, the TOU conference was so exceptional. And I think TOU on demand is such a wonderful product that you can access really anytime. And it's something that I'd spent a good bit of time on before I came to the conference itself. Dan, for our listeners, will you tell them what TOU on demand is and what they get access to?
TLU on demand is recordings of everything we've done. So we've done almost 400 webinars. So those have all been recorded. We started those back in March of 2020. And I also gathered the pleadings, transcripts, and PowerPoints for all those cases. And it also has 3 years of live conferences. So there's 3 Vegas conferences, 2021, 2022, and 2024. 3 Huntington Beach conferences, 22, 23, and 24. New York conference from last year, and the Panis Trial College from Marina Del Rey. So I think there's a total of 8 or 9 full conferences on there, but they're all multi-track conferences. So it's a lot of content. And it's also an app for your phone, so that way you can, obviously accessible anytime, anywhere. And we're in the process of finishing up building a tool for AI that will transcribe and index all of the videos. So that way it kind of be much more searchable, findable, indexable. So that's what TLU on demand is.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, a fair number of mornings each week, get up early, try to do a little bit of exercise like the doctor's been telling me for a long time. And, finally they got my attention with some different health tests. And usually, when that exercise is going on, there's something, TOU on demand or a podcast is playing in the background. So for anyone who doesn't have TOU on demand, who hasn't been to a conference, I can't
if people send me an email, dan@triallawyeruniversity.com, I'll send them a 30-day comp code so they can check it out. Won't cost them a dime. If it's something they use, they can subscribe. If not, they can learn a few things, and they'll still have access to all the pleadings, transcripts, and PowerPoints, and they'll get a benefit. And hopefully people like it. But if they don't, my feelings won't be hurt. They'll get some benefit for sure.
Nice, man. That's very generous. Very generous. All right. And then while we're on TOU, let's talk about one more conference that's coming up, and then we're going to talk a bunch about cross-examination. We've got another TOU conference coming up in June, which it feels like we're in 2024 now, but as we all know, June of 2025 is going to be here before we know it. Dan, tell us about the Huntington Beach conference in June of 25.
Well, it's June 4th through 7th. It's at the Paseo Hotel, which I'm at right now. As a matter of coincidence to be coincidence, because I was down at Mardi Gras this weekend, so I stopped back in Orange County on the way home just to really just do a little pre-conference planning, meet with the management here, kind of go over some details from last year that we want to, little things to try to improve upon to, make the event better than last year. Because I got to constantly work on doing whatever we did before. Because, people need to be, I feel like I need to really impress people every time they come to a conference. They want to be like wowed, whether this is their 7th TLU or their first TLU. But Huntington Beach is going to have 4 main lecture tracks that are going to be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 9 to 5:30. So there's 6 hours a day of lectures. And it's going to have 8 workshop tracks, which are small group trainings, interactive. Some of those workshop tracks might, there are some master classes here. So, people like Boyd Belt, teach a 1-day or 2-day med mal master class, or David D. Robertus, an employment master class. So people have really focused their skill sets on one thing, like Michael Hill does an elder abuse master class. Then they have 1 or 2 days just with a small group to really work on cases and teach them everything they know about that subject. So that's kind of the educational platform. there'll probably be between 700 and 800 participants. Last year we had 600, so probably be a little bit bigger. We buy out this entire hotel called the Paseo, which is I think, a very unique experience having the whole hotel. But then we have room blocks at the Hilton and the Hyatt that are next door. So, they're all on the water. They all have ocean views. They're all really beautiful places. What else? We have theme parties every night. So, and live music outside on the ocean lawn. So that's a lot of fun. And, we turn the lobby into a gaming lounge, or it's almost like I call it a gaming lounge, but it's kind of like a club every night because we get a DJ, we have an open bar. It's probably about maybe 80 to 100 people hanging out, playing ping pong or, air hockey or foosball, whatever people want to play, or just hanging out, drinking, having, because then we have food trucks right outside there. And then we have even in the front area, like a lounge area and a bar out front. So it is, really, really great for just community and networking too, besides the learning, because it's just like you're sharing a big house. It's almost like you're back in college. It's a very different experience.
Yeah, I tell you, years ago, I got a really nice compliment from some clients. They were like, you checked boxes that we didn't even know were on the sheet. And I'll say that about the TOU conference. It checked boxes that I didn't even know were on the sheet. So hats off to you.
Thanks.
Dan, shifting gears into today's substantive topic, we're here to talk about cross-examination. And you've had a chance to learn from and work with some of the best cross-examiners of this era and before. And I was looking forward to you coming on and talking with us about your approach to cross-examination, some of the skills and techniques that you've developed. And with that, I give you the floor.
Well, thanks, Kenny. I used to be a criminal defense lawyer. So cross-examination was pretty much all I had. We didn't really call witnesses as a criminal defense lawyer. So I really got to, I guess, what I think, hone my skills, work on my skills, while practicing a lot. And then during the pandemic, I really got a chance to study the best cross-examinations, like with Roger Dodd, because we do breakdown video from Claggett, Panish, Mitnick, every top trial lawyer who had stuff on CBN. We'd use those materials and do, trainings from them. So I really got a lot of insight and ideas from there. But when it comes to cross-examination, what we teach are what I really consider to be the fundamentals, because cross is both form and substance. And so for substantive cross, I really suggest, reading Roger Dodd's Cross-Examination, Science and Technique. I think that's the Bible. I think I haven't read it in a while, but I did read it once a year for the first 4 years of my career, because I was trying a lot of criminal cases and I would read it. And then every time I read it, people are like, why do you read so much? I'm like, why do you keep rereading it? Because I'm like, I'm not the same lawyer as I was a year ago when I read it. I don't understand the things the same way. I don't see the world the same. And so, I thought it was very good for substance, but to learn form, which is the delivery, which is the jury's ability to retain what you're cross-examining on, I think there's best practices on how to do it. And so the skills that I think are critical for cross-examination are, the obvious ones are basic, like leading questions only, one new fact per question. I think most people, now they know that, but whether they actually do it is a different story, because I read, a fair bit across of other lawyers, and oftentimes I'm wondering, what they were thinking when asking such a question, because there was no real context to it, or even the form of it. So, but those are basics. But then, one skill that I think is critical is looping, and it's a skill, even though it's a deliberate act to, make a, state a fact and then repeat that fact the next question. Still, you must practice it if you're going to do it, because that's how you teach the jury. That's a fundamental skill, though.
And
cross-exam. Go ahead.
Dan, may we stay on looping for just a moment to give?
Sure.
If you want me to play the role of witness, but just kind of an example of looping.
Well, what would probably be most instrumental, since we're doing this, why don't I demonstrate the cross with you, and then we'll do a chunk of it, and then we'll stop, and I will kind of explain the concepts that are within that cross. How does that sound? Because I developed this pattern cross which, I consider to be the cross-examination of the defense medical expert. But once you master this, now you have a great foundation for every expert witness a setup, or like I call it foundation setup, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of people skip over this stuff, but I think it's critical.
I'd love to. And something I saw recently, this is outside the law. Great book I was reading. It was talking about the difference between teaching through IE, which was, hey, I just explained something and now I'm getting ready to explain it a different way, versus EG, here's the example of. And I was thinking, and the point the author was making was, the more examples you can give versus just trying to restate the concept. Like if they didn't get it the first time, they might not get it the second time. But if you give it to them and then you give them examples of how to do it, the likelihood that they're going to retain that and it's going to stay with them, much higher. So I love the idea of kind of the role play and then you explaining some of these pieces as we do it.
Are you ready?
I am.
Dr. Berger, you ready?
Ooh, now I'm looking for my dad. You've already got I felt the cortisol hit my brain. Yeah.
Okay. Doctor, you're board certified.
Yes, sir.
To become board certified requires advanced education.
That's correct.
This education, it takes place in medical school.
Medical school, and after medical school, of course.
In medical school, you take classes.
Many.
One of the classes that you take is on how to conduct a proper medical examination.
Sure. I mean, you take different classes that all teach you different aspects of medical examination. But yeah, I mean, they're basics to any medical examination. You learn that. Yeah, it's
all right. So we'll call that chunk one. So what did we learn in that? We learned looping, right? Each sentence began where the last sentence ended. Doctor, you're board certified. Become board certified requires advanced education. This education, it takes place in medical school. So that's an example of looping, right? So it's very easy to follow. So that's the skill in action. And then the present tense. In medical school, you take classes. Not you took classes, but you take classes, because therefore I want the witness to imagine themselves back in class, but I want the jury to imagine that doctor back in class, learning how to do things the proper way. So I always speak in the present tense. Another thing you notice is my demeanor. I'm not aggressive. I'm inquisitive. I'm laying a foundation. There's no attack, although it's, I think it's a subtle attack, because this cross kind of draws a line in the sand. And so, comparing the right way to do something versus the wrong way. But it's not aggressive, which is critical, because a lot of people see cross, they doctor, you're board certified, and they're like angry about nothing, and it's weird. Another technique that I'm demonstrating is, as I'm talking to you, I'm pacing. I'm very mindful of the pace of my delivery of words, and mindful to clearly articulate the words that I'm using, and to speak slower than I normally would, because this pace that most of us speak at, especially if we're, lawyers, we're higher educated, is faster. It's more rapid than most people speak, because our brains work faster. And we're typically used to speaking to people around us who work with us, who understand our processes. So therefore, we can speak much more rapidly to them, and they can get everything. Well, with a jury, it's a whole different story, because they're not all as educated as you, and they're not used to your terminology and your language, like the people who work with you. So therefore, if you want them to retain information, you have to intentionally speak more slowly and pause, especially pauses before concepts that you really want them to remember. So those are some of the key skills I think were demonstrated in chunk one.
I love that. And I also love the simplicity.
Exactly. Very short, succinct sentences. I'm not arguing with anybody. I'm just simply stating facts. So now the next chunk, we're going to learn about the right way to do a proper medical examination and practice using a flip chart. Of course, we'll have to use my imaginary flip chart right here and practice glance control, which is you look where you want the jury to look. So, are you ready, Dr. Berger?
Yeah, and Dan, we stay on that for just a moment. Glance control and looking where you want the jury to look.
Sure. So if I'm using a flip chart, if I write down, proper, I underline, put a number 1 and put impartial. All right. If I want the jury to look at it, I have to look at it. If I'm still looking at the jury and I put my hand up here, the jury's gonna stay looking in my eyes. Just like if I want you to read this cup, if I want you to read this thing, it says hello. And then as soon as I say, hey, do you see where it says hello? It's it's your unconscious processing to look into my eyes and away from my visual, which is no bueno, because you want all the jury to be acting the same, to having a group experience. So the group experience is all looking where you look, where you direct them to look with your glance or your eyes. So that's glance control. Just like, we're not really doing it, but if you try to, if you're telling a story and you're creating space, you're like, there's this car and it's driving down the road. If I stay looking at the jury, they're never going to look and picture my car, leaving. But if I look at his car and driving down the road and my hand moves with the driving, well, they're all like to look at that way and imagine what I'm talking about. So that's why so many people make the mistake of thinking they have to like stay locked into the jury during the entire presentation. And it's like monotony because the jury never imagines anything. And it's weird because people don't behave like that. Because whenever people tell stories from their own life, they're constantly going into, the images in their mind, quote unquote, creating space in front of us because they're reliving the experience. So the more that we can present the stories of our cases as if we're reliving them, as if the story happened to us, well, that works because in order for us to tell the story that way, we almost have to be transported into the story to experience the story. And if we can transport ourselves, we first have to be able to transport ourselves before we can transport the jury. So unless we experience the story, the jury will never experience the story if it doesn't become real to us.
And Dan, I think this is so important. I want to stay on it for a moment. In terms of transporting yourself into the story to be able to tell the story, what are some of the techniques or recommendations you have for lawyers in accomplishing that or working toward that?
Well, one is you really have to obviously know the story. I mean, you can't tell a story you don't know. I mean, you have to do your best to have lived the story, which is, it's what everybody knows, which, it seems common sense, obviously going to your client's home, spending enough time with them so that way you are basically, channeling them when you're speaking, right? Because you're so connected. But that's just one half of the work. The other half of the work is, becoming a great presenter and understanding how to present, understanding the, eye contact, facial expression control, hand movements, voice control, glance control, all these skills of presentation take a lot of training to become good at them. And if you don't do that training, well, then you're just going to do the best you can. And for some people, it's pretty good, but for most people, it's not very good at all because, people will say, oh, you just got to be authentic up there. To a point, unless for most people, being authentic is nervous and scared as hell and terrified. That's their authentic state. Well, I don't think that quote authentic state, I don't think persuades because you can't connect with somebody if you're up there shaking and you're nervous. Now they might feel sad for you, but they're not going to follow you, most likely. I mean, you have a more difficult time getting people to follow you if you're all shaky and nervous up there because I think the logical mind says if you're right and you're on the side of truth, why would you be nervous?
Dan,
Not everybody.
talk about this before we came on of, in the time that I spent at the conference, one of the things I really wanted to take away was what are some of the common threads, the commonalities between your best of the best, right?
Yep. Right.
And
what did you determine those to be?
I mean, there were a lot, but there were 5 that were put in our newsletter that really stuck out. The first one was preparation. The next one was teamwork. The third was experience. The fourth was conviction. And the last one was framing and storytelling. And the reason I bring that up now is when you're talking about that authentic self, when you see a Randy McGinn or a Nick Rowley or a Brian Panish or a Sean Claggett, I mean, the list goes on and on. As they present, as they try cases, outwardly relaxed, confident, focused, and full of knowledge that what they're saying is true and right, which gives them that creative freedom to really be present and tell a story without spin, but that's true, that's going to be real, that transports the listener to that place to really understand, you know, the nature and recklessness oftentimes of these terrible decisions the defendants made for a long time before it ever caused harm, and then the devastating harm that it caused on this person. But they don't waver. There's not an uncertainty. There's no real questioning. It doesn't appear outwardly in terms of their skill, because they've spent so much time developing those skills such that their authentic, truest selves in that moment seems to be a person who's full of confidence and conviction in the righteousness of their cause.
Well, confidence comes from, of course, different places, but training and winning. You know what I'm saying? When you know from knowledge, you know your shit inside and out, and then you win and you win and then you win and more. Well, of course, you're going to be steamrolling with confidence. That's why the people at the top stay at the top, because an important part of performance is your mental view of yourself, which is your ego, your confidence or lack thereof. You know, there was a bunch of law students, like 15 of them at TLU. And I think I said to them, I said, every day you gotta look in the mirror and just tell yourself, everybody loves you. You got the greatest voice. Everybody wants to hear you. You're beautiful. Everybody's eyes, they just want to stare at you. All these people adore you. Everybody adores you. Tell yourself this over and over and over. Brainwash yourself, because, you know, it's all a belief system, right? We either believe that we're amazing and everybody loves us, and, you know, or that we're losers and nobody loves us, and that, you know, we annoy people. I mean, they're both completely, you know, between our ears. You know, it's like faith and fear. They're both the invisible future. It's just, which one do you approach your, you know, which one do I approach my conference with? You know, faith that it's going to be amazing, or fear that nobody's going to show up and I'm going to lose my ass and it's going to be publicly humiliating. And, you know, because some of those thoughts cross our minds as human beings, right? The fear, you know, the insecurities, and just being strong enough all the time. Say, hey, you know, I can do this. I know I'm going to do this. I've done this before. It doesn't matter how big the challenge is. The bigger the challenge, that's why I've done it before. So I'm used to big challenges. And so, you know, really it's just about belief systems working and believing. You know, the ones at the top, they so believe in themselves. They believe that, like I said, that everybody loves them, that they're amazing. And, you know, there's no wavering from that. And, you know, some people say, oh, they're sociopaths. I'm like, okay, those are sociopaths. I mean, they believe whatever they choose to believe, whether the rest of the world believes or not. That's not what's important, that they believe.
I want to talk with you about cross-examination, and we can move into chunk 2 or part 2. But, you know, talking with you today, it's so obvious you've done the work, right? Like you've put in the time, you've studied it, you've worked it, you've honed it, you've watched yourself, you've done rep after rep after rep after rep. You've taught it such that other things probably become apparent that may not have been when you were just studying it and doing it. And now you're getting to share it. So again, once again, kudos to you for putting in the work and developing those self-beliefs and the skills of knowing, shit, yeah, this works. And not only does this work, I can do it. And not only can I do it, but I'm going to, because I've done it before and I'll do it again.
Right. Done it before, I'll do it again, and improve upon every rep is the idea too. That's the idea too of training. When you start training and everything's intentional, every question you ask is intentional, the pace is intentional, your emotional state's intentional, the movement of your hand is intentional, everything becomes intentional. That's how you build skill. If you don't train, there's no intentionality, then you're just doing whatever when you get up there, but you're not doing something repeatedly in order to build a, you know, a neural pathway, or dig a neural pathway in your mind, or build a pattern. So it's really important to do that. But we'll do the next segment of cross, Kenny, Dr. Berger.
Dr. Berger's.
We'll start. Doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation must be impartial.
Must be impartial. Absolutely.
All right. So I got my flip chart here. So I normally like flip the page over. It says proper at the top and underlined. Then I put down number 1, impartial, and then I put a number 2 underneath it. So I put a number 2 underneath it to create curiosity with the jury that there's more coming. But you have to learn to write large and legibly and just put one concept per page. So this would be the proper page. The next page will be the biased page, but I won't do them on the same page, even though I could, because again, we're teaching. And so we're going to teach one concept at a time. So next part is, doctor, by impartial, what we mean is that you're not an advocate for either side.
Not be an advocate for the medicine, for the science, for what's true.
Doctor. So as you can see, I don't care what your answer is. But we know that most defense doctors that are hired are advocates, right? As soon as that on direct, they're great. But as soon as we start cross-examining them, boy, do they start advocating. So, doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation must not only be impartial, but it must also be objective.
That's correct.
So now I write down objective, and I put a number 3. Doctor, by objective, what we mean is, and so I say what we mean is, I mean in the context of an expert witness and a trial lawyer, what we mean is that you don't cherry pick the evidence to support a desired opinion.
No, sir. And Mr. Ambrose, I mean, I think you sat here and watched me testify for an hour. There was no cherry picking. I cited the things that the test showed based on my examination of this individual.
Doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation must not only be impartial and objective, but it must also be complete.
Yeah, depending on the nature of the examination, whatever the purpose of the examination is, it has to be complete. That's a perfectly fair statement.
By complete, what we mean is that you consider all relevant information.
That's one part of it being complete, and that based on all relevant information, all pertinent testing and information is gathered. Yes.
So now I'd write complete on the board. And I think I already did that. So now it's like, doctor, the opposite of a proper medical evaluation, one that's impartial, objective, and complete. That would be a biased evaluation.
Biased in the sense of for one legal side or the other.
Doctor, the opposite of a proper medical evaluation, one that's impartial, objective, and complete, would be a biased evaluation.
Yeah, you want one to be any more biased to the defense or the plaintiff. That's correct.
So that's the end of this chunk. So again, as you can see, I don't much care what your answer is, unless it's something I'm going to spontaneously loop and whack you with. But for the purposes of teaching and demonstration, it's easy, for teaching purposes, it's easy for you to just say yes. Obviously, practice, this is because it's learning a pattern. Now, when really practicing this pattern, that's when you want your, co-counsel who's playing the witness to fuck with you every which way that the expert's going to. I mean, you know how the expert's going to fuck with you. It's not the first time you've had this guy in the stand. It's not like you don't have a transcript from him or her. So, and it's not like they don't play the same games every time, because they do. But they stop playing them when you jam their game down their throat and they choke on it, is when they stop playing, because it's not fun anymore. For most experts, it's fun to try to, whack a plaintiff's attorney around. You know what I mean? Throw them off, not let them get a full thought out. Have non answers that don't even follow the question, right? You ask a simple yes or no answer. They give you a 5-minute answer to basically to cloud over the, just to confuse the answer. That's what they do every time. Confusion, uncertainty, that's where they live. But that's why, again, you have to practice with these witnesses and practice with your co-counsel for, doing whatever the fuck the witness is going to do.
Well, I think that the exact same way that in cross, there's a plan, there's a place that you're wanting to take the witness. And I love asking the next question versus following the witness down those rabbit holes, because the witness, conversely, is wanting to give those answers to take you where he or she wants you to be. So that there's
Right.
that, there's that tug of war going on. And if you start following them, you got to remember they got a plan too. They came into this thing with a plan of where they are taking you, and they want nothing more. Let's be honest, they want nothing more than to go home that night, pour themselves a drink, and laugh at the fool they made the plaintiff's lawyer out to be. They just, it's like they want nothing more. And, when you talk to experts, they all have these war stories about how they humiliated an attorney on one side or the other, and they live for it. And I love that by asking your next question versus chasing the witness down their rabbit holes, you're taking that proverbial drink right out of their hand.
Right. It takes a little bit of discipline not to answer questions that were posed to you by the expert, and that also takes some judgment, because if it's a legitimate clarification question, probably should answer it. But if it's an obvious question with simple words, and the guy's like, oh, I'm not sure. What do you mean? It's like, let's try this again.
Yeah, they
what
just
I
got
mean?
done
It's like,
talking about pan-retinal photocoagulation, and now they need the definition of bias. It's like,
right, exactly. It's
Right.
like, give me a break. So now we got the right way, but through defining the right way, we've kind of basically highlighted everything that we believe our defense expert's going to do that's improper, so that when he does it, the betrayal's clear, right? So now we're talking about a biased evaluation and the risk associated with the biased evaluation. So, doctor, you're trained. Actually, doctor, by a biased medical evaluation, what we're talking about is that's a type of evaluation where a paid expert chooses to only consider information that supports a desired opinion and simply ignores everything else.
That would be biased. Yes.
Doctor, you're trained that there are certain, you're trained and you know that there are certain risks associated with a paid expert's choice to conduct a biased medical evaluation.
If an expert or any doctor were to do that, that would not be in anyone's best interest.
Right. And it wouldn't be in anybody's best interest, because you know that if a paid expert chose to do a biased medical evaluation, that the jury could be misled as to the patient's condition.
Biased report would not be helpful to the finder of fact. That would be misleading.
So then I would put, so we have biased on the board, and I put misled, number one, condition, that I put number two. So again, anchoring the risks. So doctor, you're trained and you know, so that's called stepping. You're trained and you know. So if you're trained and you know, well, it's like, you can't deny this. I mean, everybody knows it, right? So doctor, you're trained and you know that if a paid expert chooses to conduct a biased medical evaluation, not only could the jury, so this is what I call bringing the jury in, and then maybe on the third time, our jury, right? But not only could our jury be misled as to the patient's condition, but the jury could also be misled as to the extent of the patient's injuries.
It's correct.
And notice, I don't say right, correct, isn't it true at any point. I've dropped all the filler words like and, so, and okay, and etc. Right? Those are all filler words. It takes a lot of discipline to drop all that stuff. Most people don't. Most people have every tagline, right, correct, isn't it true, no matter how much training they do. And they have all those filler words. Every sentence almost begins with an and ends with an okay if there's a long enough pause. That's most people. That is, a lot of clutter and a lot of filler that does not move the story forward. But most people will never drop that stuff unless they really intentionally train themselves to drop it.
So Dan, what did you do to intentionally train yourself to drop it?
Well, just make the effort, and then I would have, I did a lot of my early trials in video courtrooms, so I could watch myself on video at the end of the day and see what I was doing. And so when I'd say or it would annoy the shit out of me. And so therefore, I just, and I practice too. I mean, I practice doing this cross right here. If you practice doing this, people don't like to practice, which is the weirdest thing, because every skill, in order to even maintain a skill, requires practice, let alone getting better at that skill. You have to practice. And so I practice this cross quite a bit. I mean, I teach this class on average once a month. I've taught it over 50 times. I mean, I wrote the cross. So like me, it's just part of me now. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't even imagine all that other stuff, because it's just, why would you put, it's like, why would you do that? I mean, but it's just like training yourself too, to do things like using a flip chart. You'll never use a flip chart in the courtroom if you don't practice using it in your office. You won't. There's just too much fear. There's too much risk. There's, it's not going to help that much. It's not worth the risk. Where it probably will help a lot, but it's not worth the risk if you didn't practice.
I love that. I mean, I kind of want to repeat that. It's not worth the risk if it hasn't been practiced, because then it is risky. Versus
then it is risky.
Versus you practiced it, you got it down, you've done it, you're going to do it again. You can do it in your sleep.
And the thing with learning new skills is whether it's how to more effectively use visuals, because now you just learned glance control, or the skills we're talking about here, or using a model in trial. But like once you start learning new skills, then you start thinking about your trial presentation. But now you got this new set of skills in order to think about the presentation of the story. And so it's like a whole different story, because it's like you have language, you know what I'm saying? If you're trying to tell a story, you only got 100 words to choose from, your story can only have so much complexity or depth because you just don't have the language. Well, these skills are like language. Like once you have them, and once you can, the beauty is once you can really tell the story, so it's like that, and you're almost reliving the story in front of the jury. Well, if you're a great presenter, then it's so much easier to transport yourself, hence transport the audience into the story. So now that they experience it, and it's just not words on a page or a transcript, it's actually something that they're living through, both not just seeing it, but like emotionally experience it, which is critical.
And also looking forward to, instead of fearing it, right?
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's a lot more fun when you're confident and you're certain stuff's going to land, and you got an impeachment that you set up, and you practice that impeachment. You just didn't set it up, but you actually practiced it. So that way you've done it in your courtroom or your office several times, so that when you're setting it up, it's like this, it's easy. But when people don't, like write down or make notes of everything that might be objectionable, the reasons on the evidence code, why it's not objectionable. So they're thinking about every objection that could possibly, so that way they object, it's like, boom, 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 you got the answer, like right there. Because why would you not? I mean, you know what I mean? They're trying to play games with you. And by having the answer, it's like, okay, this is not a game we're going to play today, because I'm going to slap you around every time you try to play. And it's not going to be fun for you. And eventually you'll stop playing. But that's what preparation is. So the next part is, doctor, you're trained and you know that if a paid expert chooses to conduct a biased medical evaluation, not only could the jury be misled as to the patient's condition, the extent of the patient's injuries, but perhaps worst of all, the jury could be misled as to the human suffering and damages that were caused.
That's correct.
And so therefore you have your trilogies on both. And this is the risks, right? So we got the right way, and then the risks of the wrong way, right? So it doesn't matter what expert you have. Think about it. You have a biomechanics expert. Well, the right way is still the same way, right? Impartial, objective, and complete. And you can define those any way you're comfortable with, because a jury doesn't know what they mean. They don't know what impartiality means in the context of a courtroom. They know what impartiality means in the context of a football game, or the context of, maybe a judge at a swimming meet. but not in the context of a trial. And the same thing with objective. And what does it mean to complete in the context of an expert witness? So it's up to us to define them, but they can be defined the same way or whatever way somebody's comfortable defining them. But then what's the risk? Let's say of a biomechanic. What's the risk of him being biased? But the jury won't, appreciate the forces that were involved in a crash, right? If they won't understand, if they can't understand the forces, they may be misled as to the injuries that were caused. And if they're misled as to the injuries, well, then again, they're going to undervalue the human suffering and damages. So, however obviously it's designed to be a frame, then to be manipulated or filled in or changed based upon the cross-examiner and the witness. So, but people have to have a starting point. Most people have no starting points. Their starting point is, I don't even know what it is, but just some random questions that don't end with correct, right, or isn't it true? So that's the third part. So then the final part is the conclusion, which, I think like this cross draws a line in the sand. And if somebody said to me, if I don't have any impeachments, should I do this cross? I'm like, of course you should do this cross. If you don't have any impeachments, that's a terrible, if you're not going to whack the person, why would you set him up? Just to show everybody what a great guy he is? That wouldn't make any sense at all, right? So the conclusion is, doctor, let me ask you this question. So that's called the refocusing move. Or can I ask you this? I think that type of rhetorical device should be used at the end of every chapter or topic, however you want to call it, of cross-examination, because it tells the jury, this is why we came down this path. Typically considered cross-examination like leading a witness down the hallway and closing the doors as you go. So therefore, once we get to the goal fact, we don't care what the answer is. If they agree, great. If they don't agree, it doesn't matter because they look even worse because it's so logically conclusive, whatever our statement is. So the final part is, doctor, let me ask you this question. On December 14th, 2022, you had a choice to make. So tell us all, look at the jury, what did you choose to do?
Well, I chose to do a complete and an objective and impartial medical examination, just like you described earlier.
All right. So to be clear, you chose to do a proper medical evaluation, and I flip my page back over because remember it's on bias right now. So it draws attention. One that was impartial, objective, and complete, like you're trained to do. And it's your word in front of this jury under oath that you did not choose to intentionally violate your training and conduct a biased evaluation. I flipped the chart because you were aware of all these risks.
Of course not.
Is that what you want to tell us?
That's 100% correct.
All right, doctor, would you come down and put your initials on the board here and the date? So whether you do it or not doesn't matter. And because some people may object, I'll do it for you. So we know it's your testimony. So now I have a nice little piece to use in closing. But so that's a bias versus proper cross. So I think that teaches all the skills, which I kind of mentioned, which is, the looping, dropping the taglines, dropping the filler words like, right, okay. So being mindful of our emotional state, being intentional with it, slash our facial expressions, being mindful about the pace of our language, pausing, especially because pausing is sort of like, it's been called a trance induction move. When you pause, people lean in. So doctor, you're trained. Or doctor, by objective, what we mean is that you're not an advocate for either side. It's very different than doctor, by objective, what we mean is that you're not an advocate for either side. Because most people will speak very rapidly under the pressure of cross-examination. If they have not trained themselves and they are not used to the pressure of the courtroom, and most people aren't, I don't care, they've been doing this 20 years. If they haven't stepped in that courtroom in 2 years, there is no memory of the pressure. And that pressure, as we know, can be very heavy and it can be crushing at times, right?
And we built a 6-person jury box and a witness stand at the back of our office more than anything for us to be able to practice with an actual witness stand, actual jury box, actual free open space, because it's just different. It feels different, it sounds different, it looks different in that setting than it does in your living room or a conference room or your office or anywhere else other than a courtroom setting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously to train well at anything, you want to get as close to the, the real experience as you can, right? But we all know there is nothing that is really as like trial, between the stress and the battle and the rhetoric and all the shit that's moving simultaneously. But because there's nothing that is exactly like it, doesn't mean, some people are like, well, then why even practice? Why train? It's not the same. No, it's not the same. Just like the driving range isn't the same as the tee box, but it's sure a lot better than just visualizing it in your head.
Yeah, it's
At
like,
least you're doing the movements.
yeah, Lombardi didn't run the toss sweep, on the practice field, or not run the toss sweep on the practice field because he was like, there aren't 75,000 people here. Let's wait till game day. It's not similar enough. It's like, no, you run that shit and you run it and you run it and you run it. And let's get really, really good at that. And once we're really good at that, we'll add another play off of it.
That's exactly right. Because even though it's not the same, as close as we get, and the more reps you do, the more confident you're going to be, the more relaxed you're going to be, and the less bandwidth it's going to take to, perform that particular skill. Because when you walk in that courtroom, the skills, they better be part of you. Because if they're not, you can't can't really consciously draw a skill up. You know what I mean? Like if you try to, like you're going to catch a football, you think, how should my hands be when I'm catching the ball? No chance of catching that football, right? Everything has to be, unconscious when it's happening, because that's a skill. Skill is unconscious processing.
So you were talking about driving ranges earlier. The good fortune to have a little natural talent at golf. Never great, but always good. Man, tournament golf is different than playing around with a buddy, which is different than hitting balls out on the range. But it doesn't mean you don't go do the latter two. You do them
Right.
over and over and over, and you try to, as best as possible, simulate the real conditions. So that when you're under a little more pressure, self-imposed or otherwise, when your heart rate's a little faster, when your blood pressure's a little higher, that everything still works the same.
That's what we're hoping for, that everything works the same under pressure. Under pressure. I forgot to tell you though, in addition to the stuff that we talked about, I'm doing a boot camp with Joe Freed on trucking. It's a 4-day boot camp that combines both case framing and presentation skills. So we're gonna do that out in Vegas. That's March 5th through 8th. And then I'm doing one with Satch Oliver, which is, applying, depositions or trial to all your trucking cases. I'm doing that one April 1st through 5th. So I'm pretty stoked about those two classes because, well, first of all, those guys are really good at putting together these cases. So you gotta, because like to get big verdicts, you not only got to be a great storyteller, which I think I help people become great storytellers, but you got to tell the right story. I mean, you can be a great storyteller and tell the wrong story, and you're just going to get, your medical bills, but you're not going to get a big recovery because it's the story of, like, called, the victim story. It's called the mommy, why me story, instead of the betrayal story, which is we got some bad guys here. There's some bad shit to some of our community members. And I'm the sheriff, you're my posse, and we're going to go round them up and we're going to hang these bastards from the highest tree so that everybody knows what the consequences of bad behavior are in this community. And that's how we keep it safe. So, that's the story, right? The story of we're law enforcement and we're enforcing, these civil laws to keep us all safe. So, so I'm stoked about.
Hey, Dan, real quick, going back to Cross, I want to make sure we highlight something. You made a great point earlier on, and if you don't have the impeachment evidence, this is not the place to take.
Not the cross to do.
But yes. So Dan, just to go back to it, you had mentioned earlier, and I love that you pointed out, if you don't have impeachment evidence, if you don't have evidence that they violated these things upon which they were trained on and which they knew, this is not the foundational piece. This is not a fundamental thing. But for the folks who do have the impeachment evidence, once that flip chart has been initialed, once they have put their name to it, they have doubled and tripled down under oath in writing. If you've got the impeachment evidence, where do you like to go next?
Well, I think typically the first chapter or chunk across should be their preparation for testifying. So now we know a foundation for all their knowledge or lack thereof. And then pretty much this would be right after that. But then after that, really it depends on the trial, right? How do you want to sequence the information? You have the setup. So, I mean, sometimes there's more than one setup chapter. But then, really it's about, I think, if you have any substantive cross or educate, like what they call it, educational cross or constructive cross is what Roger Dodd says. Let's say it's a pain doc. You want to talk all about pain, how pain traumatizes a human being, destroys the life. Well, you might want to do all that stuff that they're going to give you before you show why the person's dishonest and all the fucked up shit they did. Because why you would, I mean, obviously you don't want to do all your constructive stuff after you fuck them all up because you've already destroyed their credibility. Why would you want to give us something that gives them credibility back, which is supporting our story? So I think up from there after the foundation stuff, all the concessions, everything you agree, and then hopefully comes the wax, where they get waxed, where they get destroyed with all the stuff they don't know and all the stuff they didn't do and all the stuff that they can't explain. And just on cross too, I think it's so critical that people videotape their depositions. People are like, oh, the expense this, expense that. I'm like, if a case ain't worth videotaping the depositions, you probably shouldn't have taken the case, right? And if you don't think, and in most jurisdictions, when you win, you get your costs, and those are some of the costs. And so if you don't think you're going to win, why would you even waste your energy on a case? I mean, it makes no sense when there's so many cases out there. Why would you take scrap? But like doing impeachments from a transcript is so, 1980. Just makes no sense at all. I mean, when people can hear a witness say one thing and they look at that witness's face and everything looks like truth and honesty because it's a sociopathic medical doctor who lies through his teeth for a living, or a cop, if their lips are moving, you don't know if they're lying or not because they look the same, right? Well, when you show a video of them saying the opposite, but they look the same, well, now there can't be, that's to me like the most impactful betrayal, because you cause the person to question their own ability to judge and evaluate others because they've been tricked, because they just got tricked by that witness ahead of time with the question before because they actually believed them. So
And another thing I love that's happened here is, without coming out and saying it, you're calling total attention to the why, right? You're calling total attention to the fact that they are willing to lie under oath, mislead jurors, cause additional harm to a human being who did nothing wrong, all while wearing a freaking white coat in violation of everything that they knew and had been trained to do since medical school, and honestly, since long before that, and the things that we knew as children. And for,
right.
for what?
Money. It's all about money. And no, it is the setup is so important. That's all I can say. And there's, saying doctor. That's why I say officer. Part of it is doctor is a term of respect to keep building up the witness, right? Everybody, there's no doctor you call Mr. Mr. Berger. Nobody calls your dad Mr. Berger.
If you want to piss off my dad, call him Mr.
Call
Berger.
him Mr. Berger. Oh yeah, no, most doctors be like, it's doctor. It's like, oh, sorry, sir. But they're so arrogant. I mean, to me, that's a matter of arrogance. Like somebody calls me Dan. It's Daniel. Please get my name correct. Or it's this lawyer. His name's Lawrence. I call him Larry. He goes, it's Lawrence. I'm like, oh, excuse me, Lawrence. Sorry. Didn't realize it was so formal. You know what I mean? But that's how I feel. I was like, okay. Like, like anybody knows you're a doctor. I mean, you know what I mean? Unless you're wearing a white jacket, and you're in a hospital, fine. It's obvious. But generally beyond that, it's not so obvious. So,
Dan, this has been great for folks who want to train with these workshops you offer throughout the year. For folks who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way is my cell phone, which is 248-808-3130. The second best way, so either call me or text me because I see those right away. The second best way is email. but that's not quite as reliable because there's a lot more emails that come through than text, and there's a lot more junk emails than junk text. So it's more risky, but still effective.
And your
I'm
email,
about 99% of emails, 100% of text.
your email is dan@triallawyersuniversity.com.
Correct. That's a good point. Thank you, Kenny.
My
You
pleasure.
got it. All
Listen,
right.
It's been wonderful being with you. Thank you. Thank you very much for taking time. I look forward to seeing you out in Huntington Beach, June 4th through 7th, if not before. To all of our listeners, we appreciate you being with us. If you found this episode to be of value, please subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social media. Your engagement helps us reach more people and continue sharing the best practices that can help trial lawyers at all stages in their career continue to learn and improve. And as always, when it comes to life-changing injury and wrongful death cases in South Carolina, I'm here to help. I'm your host, Kenny Berger. Our guest today has been Dan Ambrose, and you have been listening to Best Practices. Take care.